Let's jump right into this incredibly revealing case study. Today we're exploring the massive and frankly often painful gap between the glittering promise of an international promotion and the messy reality of actually doing it. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to perform a sort of autopsy on a corporate failure that happens way more often than anyone in HR actually likes to admit. We're talking about international assignments. You know, those high-stakes opportunities that promise career acceleration, but, if they're mismanaged, can literally derail a professional's entire life.
So here is the central question I want you to keep in the back of your mind as we go through this explainer today. What happens when a dream global promotion turns into a career dead end? To really ground our analysis, we're going to follow the real-life journey of a guy named Andreas Weber. Now, Andreas was a typical, highly ambitious businessman working for a German bank. When he was selected for an international leadership program, he honestly thought this assignment to New York was his golden ticket to the executive suite. But as we're going to see, the reality was starkly different.
To make sense of exactly what happened, here is our roadmap for the explainer. First, the expatriate's dilemma. Second, where HR went wrong. Third, the corporate blind spot. Fourth, fixing the assignment. And finally, the repatriation blueprint.
All right, part 1, the expatriate's dilemma, the promise versus the reality.
Our foundation today is a rigorous 2010 study published in the Journal of Business Studies Quarterly. The researchers did a deep dive into a specific German bank's attempt at global expansion. The CEO had mandated this grand, sweeping international vision, but the actual execution of that vision severely compromised our subject, Andreas, and incredibly, his entire family. Let's look at how Andreas' journey actually played out, because it started with a massive thrill. Pre-departure, he is on top of the world. But upon arrival in New York, it's a completely different story. Zero arrangements had been made for him. He was stuck in a completely different job because of a colossal miscommunication between Frankfurt and New York HR. But, he pushes through. Over the next 4 years, he actually earns a promotion to manager and even signs a 3-year extension. But then comes the crash. His family is deeply homesick. They have to return to Germany. And because the company had done absolutely zero planning for his return, this rising star was shoved right back into a lower-level job, basically identical to the one he had before he ever left, all because the company was completely unprepared for him to come back. Which brings us to part 2, where HR went wrong, diagnosing the systemic failures. So the researchers identified 5 major systemic flaws in how this was handled, and it's an overwhelming list that shows the bank essentially treated Andreas as a placeholder, not a developing asset. You would think a massive multinational bank would have this figured out, right? But they essentially winged the whole thing. First flaw, a total lack of cross-border communication. Second, absolutely no individual career plan. He was flying completely blind. Third, total improvisation when it came to his family's transition. Fourth, they never actually evaluated his work effectiveness while he was in New York. And fifth, they completely failed at retaining their personnel by just ignoring the natural pace of human and career development. But let's pause for a second and look at the real, underlying failure here. We have to remember that accepting an expatriate position isn't just an individual choice. It requires compensating and supporting every single member of the family. The human cost here was just immense. The bank completely ignored his spouse's professional growth. They provided zero orientation, and they didn't even plan regular home leave. Listen, if the family fails to adapt, the assignment fails. It is really that simple. And it's a hard lesson that way too many corporations learn after the damage is already done.
Let's move to part 3, the corporate blind spot, naivete in the international arena.
What we see here is a massive, fundamental disconnect between the boardroom and the ground floor. The CEO's grand mandate envisioned an act local, think global strategy, boasting this shiny, company-wide international leadership program. But the messy reality on the ground? It was act local, think local. HR was acting exactly like a domestic department trying to blindly manage an international operation. They relied on rushed, last-minute recruiting, and critically, there was no bridge, none at all, connecting the beginning of the assignment to the end. The vision just did not match the execution.
As the authors of this case study point out, the bank was incredibly naive. They just assumed that because they knew how to manage human resources back home in Germany, well, those exact same tactics would magically work globally. But relying on a domestic one-size-fits-all approach completely falls apart when you step into a diverse, complex global workplace.
And if you think this is just one bad German bank,
Listen to these numbers from a wider 2010 industry study by Cohen. While tons of companies claim to support global mobility, only 33% actually require home leave. Only a quarter provide regular home country updates to their expats. And an astounding 42% have literally no specific short-term policy in place at all. This means huge, sweeping portions of the corporate world are failing to mandate basic connections, leaving their most ambitious talent completely isolated out there.
Okay, let's pivot to some solutions in Part 4, fixing the assignment, the Expatriate Management Program.
So how do we fix this? The researchers propose establishing strict, non-negotiable protocols with a very specific, unbreakable flow. Step 1. You can't pick someone at the last minute. You need early identification and training for the employee and their family. Step 2. The host country's staff actually needs to be trained on how to integrate the expat to lower that invisible cultural wall. Step 3. You need continuous monitoring of both their work and their family life. And Step 4. This is the big one. Repatriation planning has to happen simultaneously, starting months or even years before they return. An expatriate should never, ever advance to the next step without HR actively managing and completing the prior one.
The baseline goal here is treating international management as a true competitive advantage. You don't just send someone blindly across the ocean like they did with Andreas. You have to actively support leadership development. You need to mandate preliminary visits so the family can actually assess the location before they commit their lives to it. And you must provide serious practical assistance, housing, taxation help, and dual career orientation for the spouse. You are transferring skills deliberately, setting them up to succeed long before they even pack their bags.
The next goal is solving that dreaded career maze, the exact trap Andreas fell into. Being out of sight at headquarters absolutely cannot mean being out of mind. Management needs to intentionally expose these employees to diverse challenges. They need active, web-based mentorship to bridge any skill gaps. And most importantly, there have to be strict guidelines for performance appraisals that instantly recognize their success abroad. We have to ensure that an employee's time away is actively building their upward trajectory rather than secretly removing them from the promotion pipeline.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, the Repatriation Blueprint, securing the return on investment.
I want to highlight this quote from E. Cohen. Proper repatriation at end of their assignments is a crucial part of employee mobility management. This just drives home a really harsh reality. A company can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars sending an executive abroad, but if you fail the landing, you lose the talent, you lose the investment, and you severely damage your company's internal morale when everyone else in the office watches your top talent return only to be demoted.
So how do you actually stick the landing? Well, you have to treat the return trip with the exact same level of intensity and planning as the initial departure. You provide practical assistance to minimize reverse culture shock and help the spouse find a new job back home. You need a rock-solid relocation strategy that manages expectations and clearly outlines what assignments are available to them next, and you have to establish networking opportunities for a dual-way knowledge transfer, generating specific retention positions so the company actually gets to benefit from the global experience that expat just gained.
So, as we wrap up this autopsy, what is the ultimate takeaway here? It's that an airtight, highly communicative HR strategy is the only way to genuinely reward an employee for success in an international assignment. Communication simply cannot be improvised. It has to be documented, it has to be continuous, and it has to form an unbreakable bridge linking the very first day of the program to the day that employee finally returns home.
I'll leave you with this provocative thought to evaluate your own organization's human capital strategy. If your absolute top talent returned from a global assignment tomorrow, is your company prepared to elevate them, or would they just hit a dead end, exactly like Andreas? It's a question every single leader needs to have an answer for.